Hi BookTube. So today will be my review of Trevayne by Robert Ludlum. Warning, this video will contain politics, so if you're put off by that, please leave now. And I've been reading this book since early October of last year. It was like my filler book while I was waiting for other books to come in that I purchased. And at many times I actually wanted to DNF this book so badly. Because it's actually a very boring book. But there are two reasons why I did not DNF it. The first one is I had like a mild interest in what happens next. So, excuse me, like, oh, okay, I'm curious what happens next, but I won't lose sleep if I never find out. So that it had a little bit of a hook, a little bit of a, I have to know what happens next. Like, okay, what's the harm in opening a second or third drawer looking for something that's not an emergency, but you kind of need? Like, or you're looking for one specific box of toothpicks or a comb or something, and you're looking through your drawers in your house. It's not an emergency, so you'll keep looking. Whatever. That's the best analogy I can make for why I kept reading it. The second reason was I was like 1/3 of the way through already with the book, and I felt there's this language they have in cults that's called the sunk cost fallacy, where you've invested so much time in the book that you can't stop now. That you've invested so much time in something that there has to be some payoff. Anyway, so I finished it, and I think a third reason would be that I was like worried that that the books that I was buying, like I was waiting for Empire of Lies, for example, by Raymond Khoury. I bought that book but didn't get it immediately. So I was waiting for other books to arrive in the mail, and I had to fill in the time with something else. And it just happened to be Trevayne. So, with all of that out of the way, I will not recommend this book, and I give it a 7 stars. I was mildly interested in it. If you love American politics, you'll love to read this book. And in a past life, when I say in a past life, I don't mean like reincarnation. I mean past ways of thinking, past hobbies, past lifestyles. So in a past me, I was really, really, really into politics. So old habits die hard, kind of. So this book was published in 1973 under a pen name Jonathan Ryder, because Robert Ludlum was published another book earlier in the same year, and there was some kind of weird taboo back then about authors publishing more than one book in the same year. I don't get it, but and neither did Robert Ludlum, as if you read it in the introduction. So there's an interesting backstory. Okay, did I get every surface level thing out of the way? I think I did. So, what's the book about? So essentially, there's this billionaire. There's millionaire/billionaire who named Andrew Trevayne. He started a company manufacturing parts, machine parts like chips or things like that, vital parts for the space industry, for NASA. And this was published in 1973, by the way, so when they just landed on the moon in 1969. So just fresh off that. So Trevayne is a successful businessman who does some kind of fact-finding task, who in the past worked for the government in some kind of capacity, but I don't know. The book tries to say he is apolitical, so they don't mention social values, they don't mention his economic values, although he is definitely a capitalist. But they try to portray him as apolitical, but... Robert Ludlum tries to portray him as apolitical. He maybe does not fit very well into the left-right spectrum of American politics. But I would say he is more... but he's very much a centrist. So he is very political, but his views are kind of mixed. He has very much a middle-of-the-road kind of political outlook. So, he is a very successful businessman. He is recruited by the President of the United States and is confirmed by the Senate to lead what is called a subcommittee. So a committee that looks over the connections, the links between private business and government entities, between the government and businesses. So he oversees these connections. And he eventually discovers that a very, very, very large company called Genesee Industries is what we would call today too big to fail. So the United States Armed Forces, the Army in particular, is very, very dependent on the hardware that is produced by Genesee Industries, and various other things in other parts of the government, like, I don't know, non-profits, like charities. So the ties between this large company, this large corporation, and the government are too tight. And we all know that that today there were things like too big to fail, like the bailouts of 2008 and 2009. There are companies that are just too much part of the ecology, the economy, too much part of the ecosystem of our society that they cannot fail. Otherwise, the entire system would collapse. Now, here's the thing. And then so the government does most of the bidding of this company, this private company. Now, here's the thing. When the interests of the common voters and the interests of the private company overlap, there's no problem there. But when they don't overlap, when the cabal of company bosses and shareholders, when their interests don't line up with the factory worker, the farmer, the service industry person, the truck driver, the small business owner, if their interests don't line up with them, then we have a problem. Then it's not really democratic, shall we say, and the government then would not care for the interests of the common man. That's why in the past there were efforts to break up monopolies, famously by Theodore Roosevelt in the early 20th century. And Eisenhower did talk about warn about a coming of a military-industrial complex. So, for example, here's where the voters and the company don't line up. The military contractors, the arms contractors, their interest is for the United States to invade other countries and go to war. So then their production sales of their weapons go up, because the government demands more weapons. But it's not in the interest of the voters, because that's bad economically, and the voters don't want war, because we want diplomatic solutions, if you still have faith in your fellow human being, that is. Now, people on the Now, this book, here's the biggest credit to this book. The biggest credit is it seemed very prescient, because in 1973, you might remember that Nixon was almost impeached, and then he resigned the following year. This was a time period when the voters really had the government accountable to some degree. These days, though, it seems the bad guys in this book have won. And there are those on the political right that will say, as long as there's no corporatism, as long as the government doesn't play favorites, the market will automatically recover. There will always be competition in a healthy capitalistic society. Whereas those on the left will say, no, monopolies and consolidation of power via private companies is an inevitable evolution of capitalism. I'm not here to preach. I am not here to preach. You're welcome to argue that in the comments, your position, okay? You're welcome to argue that. But I'm not here to preach. You make your own decision, what you believe politically and economically. Anyway, so Trevayne, let's get back to the story. Trevayne finds out that this cabal of company bosses are basically in control of elections and in control of so much of the United States that the common man doesn't matter. Trevayne wants to break up this company, and he roots out corruption, and he roots out where the interests of the voters don't align with the company. And of course, there's pushback by Genesee Industries. Now, why did I rate... So, a lot of that is very interesting. But why did I rate this book like 7 stars as opposed to 9 or 10? It's because so much of the book consists of boring meetings, people going through paperwork, people pointing out how unaccountable the corporations are, the company bosses are, and these complex relationships between the politicians, the military, and the private companies. These Game of Thrones-esque interactions, these Game of Thrones-esque relationships between these various groups, between these various interest groups. So it was a lot of palace intrigue. And the hero of this story is a billionaire. I'm sorry. I don't want to hear a story from the perspective of Jeff Bezos. I just don't. I prefer the common man or a government agent, like a policeman, a secret agent, or someone in the military, a soldier. So basically, the grunt, the soldiers in the enforcers of the law within the government. That's why there are many many police dramas and police procedurals. They're very good protagonists. So I think an agent, a government agent, as opposed to some billionaire sitting in a committee, have been a much better protagonist. And Robert Ludlum in later books has that kind of protagonist, but this is one of his earlier ones. There is some action towards the end where politicians resort to murder, like in House of Cards, where they resort to extra-legal maneuverings. But for the most part, it's just people being... I might be the one who coins this phrase. Brutally legal or immorally legal. Like, on paper, I did nothing wrong, but you're still going to hate me for it. Because I did what I did at the expense of the poor man, you know? And that is that is very much the way things are in the United States now, where the corporations run everything. Not to say that I'm preaching to Americans, because God knows that my country has the same kind of problem as well. Yeah, wealthy private interests control the world. Now, if you're an optimist and say, no, the market will correct itself eventually, feel free to tell me that. Okay, at the risk of repeating myself too much, I'm going to stop here. Thanks for listening in.